It's number 4, Joel. There we go. Can you hear me now? All right, perfect. Well, let me welcome everyone to Wayzata Community Church and Next Chapter. It's really great to have you here for what's going to be a tremendous evening. So let me, for those that are new to Next Chapter, let me tell you a little bit about, what it is and what we're trying to accomplish. We started a little over a year ago, and the goal was really to provide resources and support to help people successfully transition from one stage of life to the next. And in the last year and a half, we've had a lot of great speakers. We've had Will Steger, we've had Richard Leiter. Tonight we've got Justice Page. So really a lot of great wisdom and a lot of great information that we can all use. So again, let me give you a little bit of the ground rules about tonight. And I should have like the White House, I should have a teleprompter, but I don't. So I'm going to have to read my notes. So hold on. So quick housekeeping details. The presentation will be roughly an hour, and Steve and Alan will let us know when they've covered that. And then after that, there'll be a Q&A, a chance for any of you folks to ask a question of Alan, and we will have mics here that will roam around the room. So when we get to that, just raise your hand and we'll come see you. Also, there are an awful lot of people that make this happen, and I want to make sure to recognize them. And a lot of them are here tonight. So we've got Joel and Rick Graft that do the AV, and they'll be taping this, so if you want to watch it tomorrow or sometime in the future, you can, and please share it with anybody that you think might enjoy it. We've got John Estrom back there. He's our building manager. He's got a lot of titles, but he basically runs the church. We've got Autumn Toussaint, who also wears a half a dozen hats. Yeah, and she and John collectively run the church. But normally we have good treats for after the discussion. Tonight, Autumn has really dialed it up. So when you leave, she has baked a cake. She spent last night, and I guess well into the night, baking that cake. And so be sure to get some of that. And we really encourage everyone to hang around and have some great fellowship. But I got to give you a warning. We lock the doors at midnight. So there's going to be a hard stop on the fellowship, but make the most of it. So the other thing is we will never charge for Next Chapter presentations or materials, but we do have a free will offering if you're so inclined, and there'll be baskets as you leave if you wanted to do that. So before you go, before we start with this, let me talk quickly about the next two speakers. We have two, more really good speakers. On 11/9, we're going to have Clancy Clark. Clancy Clark is new to Minnesota, so he's probably not well known here, but he's an author and a well-known speaker, and he'll be talking about to live your dream life, you need to love what you do, and he's going to give us tips and guidance on how we can make that happen. So that'll be good. And then on 1/11, we have Mary Ann Johnson. She's a U of M mindfulness and well-being instructor at the Bakken Center. And her topic is going to be aging with resilience, mindfully. So that's pretty intriguing, and I think we could all use that. At least I know I could. So let's begin our Q&A, but let me first give you a quick background on Alan. He's truly a legend and an icon, and I know you probably all know a lot about him. I'm amazed by how many people I've talked to in the last few weeks that said they had met Alan and were totally impressed. So let me give you some quick background. He grew up in Canton, Ohio, and during high school and college breaks, he worked on a project that would have a lot of meaning in his later life. He helped build the NFL Hall of Fame, which he is now ensconced in. So good to build your own Hall of Fame. So he played in the NFL for 15 years with both the Vikings and the Chicago Bears. He was the first defensive player to be named MVP. He was All-Pro many years for that. And since he left the NFL, he's had so many wonderful next chapters that I think we're going to hear about in a little bit. So he started law school when he was still playing football. And when he got out of law school, he had a successful law degree. Then he was elected to the Minnesota Supreme Court, where he served for 22 years until the mandatory retirement age of 70, but not to really retire at 70. So he wrote 4 children's books in collaboration with his daughter, which is pretty fascinating. And then he and his wife Diane started the Page Scholarship or Page Education Foundation, which has raised over $14 million for scholarships. And I know they'll be talking about that more and how we might be able to help with that. But the funnest fact I heard about Alan was looking at his last game and his farewell to the NFL. So after his last game in Chicago, he indicated they were playing the Denver Broncos that needed to win to get into the playoffs, and Chicago really didn't have anything to play for. They were out of the playoffs. But nonetheless, in his farewell game, he got 3.5 sacks, which is pretty extraordinary. We would love that on the Vikings today. But when he gave his farewell address, standing with George Halas, the funnest part of it was he wound up giving quotes from Tennyson's Ulysses. And the 2 startled NFL broadcasters looked at each other and said, "Have you ever heard a defensive lineman quote Tennyson?" And so maybe we'll hear some Tennyson tonight. I don't know. But let's give a wonderful, also I forgot, I know most of you are here to see Alan, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say there are some people here that are really wanting to support Steve. And I would recognize them. But I don't want to embarrass his parents. So anyway, they're right here. So anyways, this is going to be a great evening, and we look forward to it. And let's welcome Steve and Alan.
Justice Page, it is an honor to have you here with us tonight. And as we've all been bumping into each other on Sunday mornings, people will say, well, how many more weeks until Justice Page gets here? And so we are thrilled to have you. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's my honor to be here.
And before I get into some of the questions, I got a text today from one of my friends, and he said this: so at what point is it appropriate to slip on stage and hand Alan Page my mini helmet for him to sign when speaking at a church event? Second text, and is it inappropriate to hug him? So, Justice Page, you need to know that I double as a bodyguard. So I will not let anything like that happen to you. Okay, so as Jim said, you grew up in Canton, Ohio. So tell us about your childhood. What was it like?
I think it was, well, I get that question, and there's some part of that question that people might think that there's something different about my childhood than anybody else's, and it's pretty mundane. One of 4 children, the baby.
Yeah.
And as many of you probably know, the baby child gets all the attention, and they're the one that's special. And the baby child recognizes that and plays it for all it's worth.
Yes.
I had parents who loved me, brothers and sisters who loved me, and best I can tell, it's the only one I had, so pretty typical.
Yeah.
A lot of playing outdoors, and parents who understood the importance and value of education. tried to instill that into me. You remember that I'm a child of the 50s, 40s, late 40s and 50s, and at that time, large portions of this country were subjected to state-sponsored segregation. And that was the environment that I grew up in.
Yeah.
Recognizing that for many people who saw me as the other, somebody who was less than, that I was lucky I had parents who also reinforced the notion that I was as good as and important as anybody else. Not better than, but certainly no less than anybody else.
That's beautiful. What a gift to have parents like that. Who were some of your heroes growing up?
Well, the reality is that we are influenced by those we can reach out and touch.
Yeah.
We like to talk about athletes and entertainers and politicians as those who are our heroes, but for me it was my family, my parents. They're the ones that I looked up to,
Yeah.
and they're the ones that guided me.
And did you have a faith component in your childhood growing up?
Well, I grew up in a Baptist family that my sisters at some point when they got to high school, they converted to Catholicism. I ultimately converted to Catholicism, and at some point concluded that organized religion was not necessarily what it was projected to be.
Yeah.
And I ultimately came to the conclusion that in terms of, I don't know, religion isn't the right word,
Yeah.
but, do good, avoid evil. And that's been a guiding principle.
That's a pretty good mantra.
It served me well.
Yeah, that's great. Now, just this page, you lost your mom when you were about 13.
Yes.
How did you cope with that loss?
Well, I put it in my denial box.
Yeah.
And as painful as it was, as best I could, I sort of denied it.
Yeah.
I've long story, but I might
We
as
got
well.
time.
My wife, Diane, who passed away 5 years ago, she's the one that came up with the denial box.
Oh.
And I'd like to think that I am able to compartmentalize things, but she came up with the denial box.
She wasn't having the whole compartment.
She wasn't having the compartmentalization.
Yeah.
But she came up with the denial box because when there were things that I didn't like or didn't want or didn't feel good about,
Yeah.
I just, put it in the box and walk away from it.
Man, our spouses can say some things to us, right, that no one else can.
Well, she got it right, so
I know. That's
what
beautiful.
what can I say?
Jim mentioned that, and I saw in my research that you worked on the building. You worked on the Hall of Fame building in Canton in
For
your
about
hometown.
5 minutes.
Okay, so
It wasn't a career.
on the research, it sort of reads like the founding father of the Hall of Fame building.
I worked for one of the subcontractors on the site, and actually I spent most of my time working at a different location in North Canton, Ohio, the Hoover Vacuum Company.
Yeah.
That's their headquarters.
Yeah.
And they were building a new warehouse or something, and I spent large portions of one summer sweeping up concrete. Yeah, not terribly exciting, but it's dusty, dirty,
Yeah.
and so I got the job of sweeping up the concrete.
So you're working on these two sites, and
Well,
you're either dreaming about.
I'm working on the one site in one afternoon.
Okay.
For maybe 1 or 2 afternoons that summer, they sent me over to the other one to push the broom over there.
Now I assume you didn't have dreams of being a vacuum cleaner salesperson, but
I
did
did
you
not.
dream about being in the NFL when you were working on?
Never occurred to me.
Really? Wow.
Why would it?
Well, let's talk about football for a little bit. We want to talk most about post-football, but what are 1 or 2 life lessons you learned from Bud Grant?
I don't know that I learned any real life lessons.
Okay.
From the time I started high school football, which was in the 9th grade, I had coaches that all came out of the same mold, so to speak. And so Bud reinforced what I had learned before,
Sure.
those lessons that I had learned before. But as an example, my high school coach, my first high school coach, ended up as the general manager of the San Francisco 49ers in the 80s and
Wow.
90s.
They were pretty good back then.
Yes. So, and then at Notre Dame, I played for Ara Parseghian. Wow. And then Bud. Wow. And so, I suppose if I had to think of something that I learned from him, I learned that, of course, I sort of knew this anyway, but you can play football without heaters on the sidelines. Of course, when I went to the Bears, I learned that you could play football with heaters on the sidelines. You could do it either way. And I say that in jest, but the fact is that, this sort of reinforces that denial box
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
It's cold.
Yeah.
You know it's cold.
Yeah.
You can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So you move on.
Yeah.
You put the cold over here.
Yeah. Oh. So you played in the NFL for 15 seasons,
Yes.
and can you describe how you approached football from a mental and physical standpoint? That's a long time to excel and to keep going and to finish with 3.5 sacks in your last game. How did you approach it mentally and physically?
The game, I'm trying to think about how to describe it. I mean, you sort of have to be there to to understand it. You know, I talked about some of the lessons I learned from my parents. One of them was seeking excellence. They didn't talk about it that way, but I can't tell you how many times they told me, whatever you do in life, do it as well as you can.
Yeah,
Not as well as the person next to you, as well as you can.
that's good.
Because, you know, their way of putting it was, if you're going to be a garbage collector, be the best garbage collector you can be.
Yeah,
If you're going to be a lawyer, be the best lawyer you can be. And they didn't much care. Maybe they cared more than they let on, but they didn't really say, you know, you had to be A, B, or C. But whatever it is, be the best at it that you can be. And I took that to heart. That was a guiding principle. You know, I didn't set out to be a football player. I started playing football more by accident than by design. My brother, who was ahead of me in school, played, and so I thought he seemed to be enjoying it, so I'd give it a try. Evidently, I had a knack for it. And
evidently.
And it came easy. I mean, I didn't have to work at it. Not terribly hard, other than, you know, being in shape.
Yeah.
But and I will admit to you, I managed to have coaches that allowed me to do the things that I did well. And I understood that what I did had to fit within the confines of what the team was doing.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't just go off and do your own thing.
Yeah.
And so doing what I was able to do well, and there weren't that many things that I was able to do well, but the ones I could do well, I could really do them well.
Okay.
Doing that in the context of what the team was trying to accomplish, it just, for whatever reason, worked very well for me.
So you decided to go to law school when you were still in the NFL. Talk about that decision process.
Actually, I decided to go to law school when I was maybe 10, 11 years old.
Okay. So that was your dream.
Yeah.
Okay. got it.
Not that I knew any lawyers, not that I really understood what the law was about, not that I had a clue when it came to the law, but when I got to be that age where, or when we ask young people what they want to do when they grow up, you know, I looked around and heard stories about lawyers. They drove big fancy cars, didn't work too hard, lived in big houses, made lots of money, and played golf every, you know, Wednesday afternoon.
We got any lawyers in the room, folks?
And the prospects for a young African-American kid in Canton, Ohio in the 1950s, things went well. I might get a job in a steel mill. Had an uncle that spent 40 years working in a steel mill. And I understood that that wasn't for me, that the work was dirty, dangerous, and repetitious. And even at that young age, I knew that that's not what I wanted. And you know, dirty, dangerous, and repetitious compared to big fancy cars, lots of money and not working too hard. In the 10-year-old mind, not working too hard and big fancy cars will win out every time.
Yes. So on the other side of it, 20 plus years on the bench.
I should also say I was 8 years old in 1954 when the United States Supreme Court decided Brown versus the Board of Education. And that decision, and I can still remember reading about it in the Canton Repository in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Even at that young age, I knew that the ground had shifted.
Yeah.
That the law had the power to create fairness, create justice. And that's something that intrigued me.
Wow. You were 8.
Yes.
Did
You know, when you grow up in a world that, because of the color of your skin, it treats you unfairly
Yeah.
for something you have no control over. Yeah. Having something like the law and sort of coming to realize that the law has the power to change to that, that's pretty powerful.
It's very powerful. It also strikes me as an 8-year-old kid having the wisdom or foresight to notice the ground is shifting is something.
Well, I mean, and the ground did shift, right?
Yeah.
Not just
Not enough.
as it related to education, but it sounded the death knell for state-sponsored segregation.
Yeah. Must have been an amazing and, in some ways, terrifying time to live.
It was very terrifying, but you know what it did was create hope,
Yeah.
and hope is a pretty powerful thing. There are lots of young people today that lack hope.
Yeah.
And I think Martin Luther King Jr. said it pretty well. And I'm just paraphrasing here, but what he said was, people who have hope tend to want to build the society that they live in. People without hope tend to want to tear it down.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I was, my time on the court, there were a lot of people who I saw come through our juvenile justice system. Mm-hmm. Some were young people without a moral compass, but the vast majority of them simply had lost hope. And if you can create hope, you can change a lot.
Wow. What were some of the most meaningful things that you did or accomplished with the law in your law career, or that you saw?
Well, let me just see if I can articulate this. My approach to the law was to try to get to the right answer, whatever that was, whether it was an answer I liked or disliked. And for me, and this applied whether you're talking about the law or football or what have you. You always get the question, well, what was your favorite case? Once you start having favorite cases, you're putting your thumb on the scale.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Once you, in the context of football, once you have, you know, the opponent that you think is better than the rest, you start trying to play to their level. And for me, it was always important to play at the best level I could play at. And when it came to the court, it was doing the best job that I could with the law and the facts that's presented. And it wasn't about me. It wasn't about my preferences or my approval or disapproval. It was about trying to get to the right answer.
That's beautiful. Need more people like you.
Well, you know, having, I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but
That's great. I told you we got all the time in the world. We're going to be here till midnight, Jim said, so we're good.
now you've made me lose my thought.
I'm terrible.
And it's not coming
All
back.
right. Well, if it comes back, just stop me. Because I want to talk, you were talking about hope a minute ago, and I want to talk about, in 1988, you and Diane founded, your wife Diane founded the Page Education Foundation. Was hope a part of that decision?
Well, the foundation's model is creating hope through education and service.
So yes.
Yes. Yes. Having, well, she was a woman who had pretty strong feelings about justice, about racial justice, social justice, gender justice, educational justice. When we met, after she told me her name, the first thing she said to me was, I volunteer at a boys' club in Minneapolis. This is 1971. Boys' club on Blaisdell in Minneapolis. Would you be willing to come and talk with the kids and visit with the kids? At the time I think she was working at Pillsbury, was on the way up the ladder.
Yeah.
And yet she was volunteering in inner city Minneapolis. Some, 3 years after the riots in North Minneapolis. She had a sense that she had the power to bring about change. I had been spending time almost from the time I started playing football in schools and classrooms talking to young children about the importance of education and the values that people would ask me to talk about the values of football, even though at the time I was, pretty new to it. I didn't really understand those values myself. Over the next, 20 plus years, or I guess 17 plus years, Diane and I talked about what we might do to make the world a better place. In late January, early February of 1988, I was informed that I was going to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We decided at that point that this would be a good opportunity to actually do something, as opposed to talk about admiring the problem. And we thought that for two reasons, one of which was that was something we had hoped to do for some time, but two, to make it more meaningful, my induction. I mean, by then I'd been out of football for, 6 years, and I've never been one to spend a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror, admiring my accomplishments or admiring the past. When you're driving in the car, you use the rearview mirror to go forward, not to admire what's behind you.
Yeah.
And so we decided that this was the time to actually do something. Actually, the night that we found out I was going to be inducted, we sat down with some very close friends and talked about what we might do. And we came up with the idea of a scholarship program for Minnesota students of color.
Yeah.
We went home and talked with our 4 children about it, and they were excited and thought it was a great idea, except for our number 2 daughter said, great idea, but. And her but was, she said, you could do more. The giving people money to go to school is important, but this is 1988. Mentoring wasn't the buzzword that it is today.
Yep.
She said, we're talking about this thing in school now called mentoring. Let me do some research and get back to you. That's how we came up with our service component.
Yeah.
And just a stroke of genius as far as I'm concerned. Because, as I said, we are influenced by those we can reach out and touch.
Yep.
Well, not very many of us have the ability to reach out and touch professional athlete,
Right.
Supreme Court justice. But since we were, in theory, using my celebrity to try to bring people along,
Yeah.
what better way than to have our grant recipients do the same thing?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's genius.
magnify
Yeah.
the presence. Well, over the years, that first year we had 10 paid scholars. We call them paid scholars. That first year we had 10 paid scholars. This year I think we've got 465. There have been over 9,000 over the last 35, 36 years. And each and every one of them has done 50 hours of service per academic year while they're in school.
Yeah.
With young children, kindergarten through 8th grade, sending those young kids the strong, clear message that education is a tool that can be used to change the future. I mean, they're actually using that tool,
Yeah.
and young people get to see them using that tool.
It occurs to me, the math is infinite. It's countless how many kids that you've impacted through the service component alone. We'll never know the number.
Well,
But 50 hours of service times 9,000, that's a lot of kids that are impacted.
It's really interesting. First of all, we never asked the kids to do anything that we don't do.
That's good.
But everybody wins. The scholars win.
Yeah.
They grow
Yeah.
and develop as part of their service. the young children they serve. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
I don't know if you can see how his face is lighting up, but I can. And it's a rare thing to talk to someone who's genuinely passionate about what they're doing.
Well, if you're not passionate about it, why are you doing it?
Come on. Now you're preaching. I love it. No, I love it. I love it. So this group is called The Next Chapter, and it's really dedicated to helping people make the transition from one chapter to the next, whether that's retirement or dealing with a loss and so in your various chapters, did the same approach to doing well work, or did you have to come up with new approaches for your next chapters?
No, I'm kind of a one-trick pony,
All right.
and
Well,
it's worked so far.
and if I'm reading you right, what I've heard is you do you. You do you. And you don't try to play to other people's levels. You don't worry about that. You stay true to who you are. You do the best you can do.
You try to figure out what's the right thing to do,
Yes.
and then do it,
Yes.
and do it as well as you can. And how others perceive that, they will perceive it.
It's not your business.
You're not doing it for them.
Yeah. I love that. Takes a kind of resoluteness to stick to that, though, I think.
Oh, maybe.
You just got it.
It's just me.
Okay. If we were to talk about legacy, how do you want to be remembered?
I leave that up to other people. Not my problem.
My uncle.
I will follow up and say,
Yeah.
we talk about legacy as though, you did something in the past,
Yeah.
and will
Yeah.
it be remembered? I tend to look at legacy a little bit different.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the quoting Tennyson.
Yeah.
The quote was, "I am a part of all that I have met." I believe that.
Yeah.
And one of the beauties of what we do with the Page Foundation is all those kids that our scholars touch, that carries forward through the people they touched
Yeah.
and through the people that those people touch.
Yeah.
To me, that's a legacy.
Yeah. I agree.
But,
But
looking
maybe what I hear is you don't have to have that come back to you in any kind of honorary way. You just want it to happen. You just want that thread to keep going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's huge. You have written some children's books with one of your daughters.
4 of them.
4 of them. How is that process?
Doesn't get any better.
Oh, man.
Alan and his perfectly pointy and possibly perpendicular pinky.
What a title.
And if you'd like to meet Alan's perfectly pointy and possibly perpendicular pinky,
There it is. So is that like your daughter's idea? Dad, let's write a book about that.
actually, the idea came from an experience I had back in the late 80s. I was involved in a late 80s, early 90s. I was involved in an essay contest sponsored by Eastman Kodak for fourth graders across the country. And we would visit schools across the country and spend time in classrooms with the fourth graders. And we visited Cleveland, and we'd visit 2 days, 2 or 3 schools a day. And one of those classrooms, I was talking with the kids, and just to do something different, I'd bring up, we were going to buy a car, and then do a math problem based on buying the car, and call on the kids to help me through the problem. And I called on this one little boy, and there was this kind of nervous, sort of uncertain sort of feeling going through the room, as though you called on the wrong one here.
Yeah.
This is not going to end well.
Yeah.
Because evidently they figured he wasn't the smartest kid in the class, and maybe a bit of not a troublemaker, but
Yeah.
And of course, what they didn't understand was that, you call on kids and they give you the answer and you praise them and all that, and everybody's happy. They were thinking
He's not gonna.
Of course, what they didn't understand was I wasn't going to let him fail.
Yes.
Yes. And we worked through the problem. And they're fourth graders, and it wasn't the highest order of math, but we were doing a $60,000 car and 7% sales tax, and you add it in and you subtract and you do this and you do that. And he did it. And you could feel the tension go away. Wow. And I think they were pretty proud of him.
Yeah.
And I think he was pretty proud of himself.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of the spirit in which we came up with the idea for Ellen and this perfectly pointy and possibly perpendicular pinky. The kid that everybody sort of
Wasn't sure of.
That's how that one came about. Goodness. Number 2 was The Invisible You. This one was my daughter Cammie's idea. At the time, she was a second grade teacher. And she didn't have a good tool to use in the classroom to talk about differences. So she wrote a book about it, and it's become a tool that teachers, I think, find useful. Any number of teachers along the way tell me that they really appreciate that book because they can use it to help kids talk about differences.
Talk about differences. Yeah.
And then Grandpa Allen's Sugar Shack.
Sugar Shack.
Making maple syrup. And then the 4th book is Bee Love Can Be Hard. We're all afraid of bees, right?
Yeah.
Well, we wrote a book about protecting bees.
So that guy right there that looks just like me, he's my dad. And when he retired, he started keeping bees.
Yep.
He loves it.
Yes. Yeah. He probably knows this fun fact. You know what honey is, basically? Bee barf.
Did you know that? Bee barf. That'd be a good 5th title.
Pretty good stuff, though.
Oh, that's great.
And we actually have book 5. Like we just did a photo shoot with the artist on book 5. Unfortunately, it won't be out until this time next year, but it's in the works.
Can't wait.
Don't have a title yet.
Justice Page, I heard this quote, can't remember who said it, but they said, celebrity is currency. You just need to decide how you're going to spend it, if you have it. And it seems like you've spent your celebrity in terms of spreading hope and helping the kid that everyone else thinks is a failure know that he's not a failure.
Well, I suppose you could look at it that way. Figure out what you're doing, what you want to do,
And do it.
and do it,
Yeah.
and do it well. And I have had the opportunity to both Diane and I have had a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
We decided that we had the ability and the power to make the world a better place. And this is how we decided to try to do it.
Yeah.
We all have that power.
Yes.
In our own way. I think Martin Luther King Jr. also talked about, and maybe somebody before him talked about bending the moral arc toward justice.
Yep.
We all have the power to bend that arc. We just have to do it.
Wow.
And the real secret is acting. Talk about power. I learned Diane was a doer. She was not much for sitting around talking about things. What are you going to do, and when are you going to do it? And the sooner the better,
Yeah.
so we can get on to the next thing.
She sounds like a remarkable woman.
She was incredible.
Yeah. 45 years?
45 years married, 2 years before,
Wow.
47 years total.
Yeah.
Actually, even though she's gone, she's not.
Thank you for that.
She still inspires me. She still is trying to get me to put away the denial box and making sure I act.
Yeah.
Acting did not come naturally to me.
It seems like she affected you very deeply.
Incredibly so.
Yeah.
The
And I
love
think
of-
you're right. I think she is still here.
The love of my life.
Ugh. Can I ask you one more question? And these people want to ask you some questions.
I learned something a long time ago. That one more question is invariably the one you don't want to get. But go ahead.
Well, so in other interviews, I've asked people, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I would have asked you?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm just saying yes to the fact that
Okay.
that's
I'm
the
not going to tell
question
you what it is.
that
I'm
you
just going to
asked.
say yes.
Are
There
you
were several.
asking that question?
No, let's go to my actual one.
Because
'Cause I'm afraid of the answer.
Because the answer to that question is no.
Okay. Here is my last question. So look out at these fine people. I know a lot of them, and if any of them are facing a next chapter right now, might be retirement, might be loss of a spouse, loss of a child. We've had that in our community lately. what would you want to say to them?
I was right about.
This is the
never-
one you didn't want to ask.
That's the one you don't want to. I mean, who am I to say? I don't know. You know, we all. I mean, change happens.
Yep.
It's coming,
Yep.
and it's always coming.
Yep.
Easy for me to say, don't let, the losses particularly change who you are.
Yeah.
As far as, changing health, changing careers, you kind of got to go with it because we don't have much other choice.
Yeah.
We all have the power, and not always easily. Some of this stuff is pretty hard.
Yeah.
But if we're willing to look into ourselves and see who we are, we can weather the storms. We may get wet and get beat up and all that, but we can weather the storms. In terms of, career changes, I mean, those kind of things are easy because that's just figuring out what you want to do and doing it, and not worrying about when you try to do it as well as you can, not worrying about the outcome. You do it as well as you can, the outcomes will take care of themselves.
That's good. Thank you, Justice Page. Let's give a warm round of applause and gratitude.
Thank you.
So now it's your turn. I think Dana is going to walk around, and maybe Jim, Jim, you want to tee this part up?
So all I can say is, wow. I'm sure I'm expressing the same thoughts of most of the people here. That's truly inspiring. And so I know now people will want to have some questions for you if you're willing to take those. And we've got 3 people here. Dana's right there. She'll take this side. Shubab will take that side, and I'll take the middle. So raise your hand if you got a question, and we'll come find you.
Should I go ahead? Justice Page, I'm over here. I have a friend that made me promise I would ask you, how would you compare your time with the Vikings versus your time with the Bears?
Well, the reality is that football fields are, 120 yards long and 55.6 yards wide, and they're all the same. It's the people that makes the difference. And in both places, I had the good fortune to work with really good people.
Other questions?
I got one.
Oh.
Alan, I used to see you play the sousaphone during the Twin Cities Marathon. Do you still play?
You used to see me making noise with the sousaphone. I think the word play would be using that term very loosely. I still do it In fact, even though this past year the marathon got canceled at the last minute, there were any number of runners who ran anyway, and we were out on our corner with the sousaphone cheering them on.
If you'd speak to your time on the Supreme Court.
I didn't quite. Could you?
I wonder if you'd speak to your time on the Supreme Court.
I should tell you I have hearing problems. and indeed, the question goes to my time on the Supreme Court. Any particular aspect of that? Well, let me just say, I loved every minute of it. I am honored and humbled by the fact that the people of the state of Minnesota gave me the opportunity to serve on our court. And putting aside family for the moment, in terms of the things that I've done in life, that is by far and away, I should say, putting aside the family and the Page Education Foundation, that is far and away the most satisfying thing that I've ever done. It's something that, from my vantage point, fit me, fit my skills, my abilities, and my interests. And I am forever grateful and indebted to the people of this state for giving me the opportunity to be there.
Justice Page, can you tell us a little bit more about the scholarship? Who are the scholars? How do they qualify? And is it in the state of Minnesota, or is it wider than that?
Let me see where to begin. Our scholars are selected. There are selected based on. Well, let me back up. Our goal with our scholarship program, the foundation, is to pull people along, not to filter them out. So our scholars are some of the best and brightest. They're also young people who have struggled academically. Our theory is that if there is an academic, post-secondary academic institution or program that will accept them, we will consider them for a grant. So our scholars go to the University of Minnesota, they go to Carleton, they go to St. Olaf's, they go to Gustavus, they go to Mankato, they go to St. Cloud, they are at Hennepin County Votech, they're at Minneapolis Community College there, and they've gone to, I think, some 105 plus post-secondary academic institutions and programs across the state. And they're from across the state. One criteria is they have to be a Minnesota student going to a Minnesota school. With one small exception, we have a group of students that we collaborate with the Notre Dame Club of Minnesota, and we have a group of paid scholars at the University of Notre Dame. But they meet the same requirements that our scholars here do. They do their service they've done their service in some 300 plus organizations across the state, schools, boys and girls clubs, community-based programs where they act as tutors, mentors, and role models for those young children. You want to know who my heroes are? They're those paid scholars, because they're changing the future by both word and deed on a daily basis. And we couldn't be more excited about the work that they do.
Justice Page. Okay. If people want to support your foundation, how do they do that?
Send money. Page-ed.org, and one of the first things you will see is the Donate Now button. We also have people who volunteer on occasion. We get about, well, since the pandemic, we've been getting about 500 applications a year. Before pre-pandemic, we were getting about 1,000, and we need help reading those applications. So anybody that would be interested in that, we'd love to have you participate with us. And if you can't remember the website address, if you Google Alan Page, the foundation will be one of the first things that comes up. We would love to have your support. We have an annual gala. In fact, we had it just almost exactly a month ago. Every year for the last 5 years, we've been at U.S. Bank Stadium, or 4 years, I guess. 5 years. We've been at U.S. Bank Stadium, and it's a great party. It's not a sit-down dinner. It's kind of a mixer, and if you want to come to a fun party, we'd love to have you come to that. We put on a continuing legal education seminar every year, coming up in December, and it fulfills the bias elimination requirements required to continue your law license. So for all you lawyers out there, we'd love to have you join us at our CLE. We also do a doggy walk every summer. A walk around, simple walk around Lake of the Isles. Bring your dog, or we actually had somebody bring a cat once. Cat on a leash, that's very strange. But bring your pet and walk around the lake with us.
Justice Page, do you have any concerns about young people succeeding, getting from one chapter to the next? How does that happen? How do you make, and you've done a lot of transitions in your life, how do you make it from one chapter to the next?
I'm having trouble hearing precisely what the question is.
Lost it? There it is.
Actually, I'm getting a little reverberation, so
Sorry.
if maybe if you could ask it without the microphone.
Yeah, I think I can. Do you have any advice for young people, for anybody, to get from one chapter to the next chapter? You've done that a lot in your life. What kinds of skills have you used to get from one, maybe a difficult chapter, to the next?
I think to the extent that I would have advice is that I mean, at some level, I've sort of alluded to it. Figure out what you want to do, where you want to go, and then just take one step at a time. You know, one of the lessons that I learned from running, I used to be a runner. One of the lessons I learned from that is to get from point A to point B, you have to take the first step. And you have to prepare to take the first step. And so you're a football player and you want to be a lawyer, well, you got to take the first step of that by going to law school. You're a teacher and maybe you want to do something else in life. You have to prepare yourself to take the first step. Preparation is key to all of it. And then acting. And sometimes there are trial and error, and sometimes you make mistakes. But you have to persevere. None of this is promised. None of the things that I have done, the different things that I have done, none of them have been promised. I've been fortunate, but I've also been prepared. And even with that, you still have to be fortunate. I mean, there's a bit of luck and a bit of preparation. The other thing I would say is, for me, I've arrived at any number of destinations. But something that I figured out actually the year that I was named the league's most valuable player is that the destination is fine, but if it's about destinations, you're going to be in big trouble. Because once you reach the destination, then what? What was really important in all of that I have done has been the journey.
Well,
just curious, is it okay right here if I keep it way over here? Can you hear me okay?
So far.
Okay. I was just curious, you were kind of knowing that at the age of 70 that you had to retire. What do you think of Washington a little bit, where you have various politicians that are working to 75, 80, and so on? Do you think that there should be an age level there for politicians?
Do I think there should be mandatory retirement? Having been subjected to mandatory retirement myself, I think as long as somebody has a contribution to make, as long as they are able to do the job, we should let them do that to the extent that they want to do it. Quite frankly, I was I had the opportunity to serve on our court for 22 years and 8 months when I reached mandatory retirement age. And I would love to have continued serving. That said, it was time for me to go. It was time for somebody else to have the opportunity. The reality is that, and I'm just speaking for myself, my time on the court, the seat that I served in was not my seat. I was just occupying it for the time that I was there. And I think one of the things that happens is that, and I think it's human nature, we tend to think that who we are is what we do, as opposed to I'm doing this but I am not, I mean, this isn't me. I'm not the one, you know, that, let me see if I can be a little clearer. Serving, it's not my seat, it's the people's seat. Whether you're a judge or justice or a legislator or the head of the executive branch at whatever level, we as individuals, those of us who have had the opportunity to serve, have to understand that A, we're not going to serve forever, and B, we need to know when it's time to go. It's same thing with playing football. You need to know when it's time to go. And I don't necessarily know that we need to have a blanket rule for everybody, but we need to have people around us to tell us when it is time to go if we're not willing to figure that out on our own.
Sorry, one last quick football question. I had an older brother who went to Michigan State and played in the 10-10 game with Notre Dame. I was just curious, I apologize not knowing that ahead of time, but were you part of that game with Notre Dame at that in the 60s?
Which game was that again?
I think it was both teams were undefeated and there was a final game between Michigan State
Oh,
and
yes.
Notre Dame, 10-10 it ended up, I thought.
I was there.
Okay. Can you talk just a quick memory of that if you, was that in Notre Dame, I guess, is my next question too of that?
The only thing I remember about that game is I got beat up. I mean, every football game is like being in a car wreck, and that one, the cars were going a little faster.
Other questions?
Well, I was just going to ask you, as long as we're talking a little football, you played it with at Chicago, and I imagine that you probably got to know Dick Butkus. Could you share a little Dick Butkus, a few Dick Butkus stories?
Dick Butkus was gone from Chicago by the time I got there. So, and we played through some of the same time period, but we were never on the field together, and he was, you know, had he been on the football field at the same time I was, he'd have just been another player. I mean, as I alluded to earlier, whether it was somebody of Dick Butkus's caliber or the worst player to ever come along in the history of the game, you still have to go out and perform to the best of your ability. And so then for me, it didn't matter who was on the other side of the football. Somebody was going to be there, and that person was going to hit you no matter what. And so I spent my time focusing on trying to do what I did well, as opposed to trying to deal with what they were doing.
Anyone else? Oh, here we go.
Justice Page, away from football, back to the court. Would you comment about the work and your work and involvement in the Supreme Court's Racial Fairness Task Force and Implementation Committee? And if you would speak to where you think we are today, given those challenges.
Just as I was joining the court was in the process of releasing a report on racial bias in our judiciary here in Minnesota. And the findings of that report, now this is 1992, were that for people of color, our justice system was not just. That it was failing. Mind you, this was 1992. It failed to live up to the promise of equal justice under the law. People of color were stopped by the police more often, arrested more often, charged more often, tried more often, given higher bails, less fair trials, longer sentences. And we spent the work continues to try to bring fairness to our justice system. I was naive enough to think that while I was there, we were going to change that unfairness. And we took, I think the report had somewhere 140, 150 plus recommendations, and we went about systematically implementing those recommendations. And the reality is that some things changed, but the system remained unfair, remains to this day unfair.
What else?
I will just say that, you know, I'm one who there is this debate about, do we want to change people's hearts or do we want to change their conduct? I'm one of those people who, quite frankly, doesn't care what's in their heart. I want to change their conduct. Treat me fairly and you can think what you want. But treat me fairly. Treat me the same way that you would be treated. Similarly situated people should not be treated differently, and we do. And it's not just our judicial system. Indeed, some of the problems underlying the difficulty in changing our judicial system is our society as a whole. We have to change as a people.
Well, thanks again, Justice Page, for those wonderful words of wisdom. You've given us a lot to think about, and I want to remind everyone that the tape of this presentation will be up on our website probably tomorrow, if not tomorrow, Monday. So if you want to share it with friends, please do. And I'm not sure that we all don't want to watch it again, so I'm going to do that too. So now remember, Autumn spent all last night baking, so please get some of her cake. She'll be heartbroken if you don't. And just remember, we got to lock the building at midnight. So have some great time of fellowship.